Hey, this is James T. Kahn, and I'm just doing a short video here. We've just released Mundus version 0.50, and if we take a look at the releases, we can see that there were a lot of pull requests, a lot of changes that came in since 0.40, and I'm not going to talk about every single one of these. It would take forever. What I am going to do is I kind of selected some of the major ones or the most interesting ones, and I'm just going to quickly talk about them, maybe show how they work in the editor. So let's get started. And if we start with the first one here, I just went ahead and opened up all the tabs already. We had some water shader enhancements. That lets us toggle water reflections and refractions on and off. You can change the color of the water and the visible depth field. So I got Mundus open. I can really quickly just show what that looks like now. We got two new options down here, so we can turn the reflections and we can turn refractions off, or you can just have reflections. With that as well, we can change the color. So if we want to have like a blood ocean, there we go. Now we have a blood ocean. And what we can also do is we got this max visible depth field. And right now you can see that you can see all the way down to the bottom. But what this does is kind of, if you want to make the water look deeper, you can reduce this. So then you can only see so deep. And you'll see that kind of fall off the further out the water goes. If you have it 100, you can see pretty far. You can see down to the bottom from far away. So that's those changes. And so next up we have making terrain assets reusable. This is just a quick change here. Once you created a terrain asset, if you removed it from the scene, I mean, that's it, it's gone. You can't re-add it to the scene or anything. So what this does is let you add a terrain asset to the scene if it already exists. So technically you could have two of the same terrain assets in the scene. And if you watch this, when you modify one, it'll modify the other as well. This can be handy if you have multiple scenes, but you want to have each scene have the same terrain in it. Maybe one scene is at nighttime and you have some other different characters or objects there. But other than that, you want to reuse the same terrain. Well, now you can do that with this change. After that, we have the ability to duplicate materials. This came in from Jake Goldsmith. I think this was their first contribution, which was very appreciated. And so before, once you had a material assigned, it was difficult, right? So if you edit a material assigned to one game object or one model, it's going to affect all of the other models. But let's say you want two boats and you want those boats to look different. Well, now you can duplicate materials with this duplicate button. And as we can see in the screenshots, so now this boat can have its own material where maybe you've made it transparent, whereas the other one stays the same. And that's just another nice little feature that got added in. So we added some convenience methods. The convenience methods for trying to find things in the scene graph were kind of limited. I think we just add some new methods like finding a child by name on the game object, finding children, multiple children, find children by component, children by tag, and there's some other convenience methods we added as well, just from the API side, from the runtime side, to be able to quickly find what you're looking for in the scene graph. Helper line, so DGZT, a feature that DGZT brought in to display configurable grid or hexagon grid over the terrain. If you're making like a unit-based or grid-based game, this could be helpful for when you're working on the terrain, just to measure out units. Another one is, so before the editor did not enable MSAA, there was no anti-aliasing. With this change, I turned it on by default. I also increased the depth buffer to 24 because by default it's 16 in libGDX, which really just doesn't really cut it. But I did add a CLI option to disable the MSAA if you're running it and maybe it's just too much for your computer. You can still turn that off. Here's another one. This one plagued me for quite a while. Ants Games had brought this issue up to me a while ago. And so what would happen is when you rotated the camera, water reflections would break. They would not they would not be in the right place. And this just ended up being really, and it's exactly what I was afraid it would be. I was telling Ants, you know, this is going to be one of those things where I'm going to spend all this time on it, and the fix is going to be really simple. And that is exactly what happened. After a month, you know, I would like, oh, I can figure this out, and then work on a little bit, get stuck, and then I finally figured out the solution. And like I said, it was just, as you can see, there really didn't require a whole lot of changes. And now reflections will work if you roll the camera, which is great. I also added a command line option to enable GL30 and libGDX. This is kind of like a stepping stone, a first step for future changes I want to make to Mundus so that it can support GL30 features. And so that's just kind of opening the door for that. Another pull request from DGZT is we got a new component called custom properties. And so I'll just demonstrate this one. If I say this boat is I don't know, let's say it's a character, and I want to add some dialogue options, I could go to add component, custom properties, add, and let's say dialogue 1 is the key. And now I could put something in here, and then at the runtime I could retrieve this component and retrieve these values. So if I had two boats, but I wanted them to have different dialogue, for instance, you could associate anything here. You could put positional data in here. You could copy out positional data and put it in here if you wanted to. Anything that you want to be able to store and then retrieve quickly at the runtime for a specific game object, this will let you do that. So that's another nice component. All right, we got a new terrain brush. This one was a feature request from Ants Games, I believe. And so I worked on this one a little while ago. And what this lets you do is create ramps on the terrain. If we go to ramp here, I select, you'll need one brush for that. What you do is, if you want to select the area where the ramp will end, you hold shift, left click, we'll see endpoint sampled. And then I can start drawing, and the terrain will actually create a ramp, a nice kind of smooth ramp from the start to the endpoint. So that's what that does. Because without this, it was very difficult. If you wanted a really nice kind of smooth ramp, it was difficult to make that happen. DGZT had another contribution here, this pull request. Before, the splat mapping did not support transparent images, so you couldn't paint like a transparent image or maybe like a decal on the splat map terrain. And with this pull request, now you can. So if you have a transparent image, it will now work. We have max height for the Heightmap, so Ants Games gave us that contribution. And before, you couldn't set max height for the Heightmap. It was hard-coded and so you couldn't really control. If you wanted the terrain to be able to be really high based on the Heightmap image you feed it, you didn't have control over that. And with this PR, now you can put that height in. Okay, this one's more of a technical improvement, but still worth mentioning. So this is, I guess you could say, the first actual GL30 feature added into Mundus, which is to use a multiple render target frame buffer for water refractions if GL30 is enabled, which this saves you an extra rendering pass. We don't have to do a separate depth render pass if you're using GL30. We can capture it all in one, so this just reduces the amount, or basically going to give you a little bit of optimization performance-wise, because it's one less render pass that has to be made if you have water in your scene. And this is, actually I'll save this one for last because that one's got a lot going on. Another one is ability to add primitive meshes, planes and cubes. I actually just added this one not long ago because I was working on the June game jam, and I'm like, man, I need like a simple plane because I wanted to create a border. Let's say I can go in a Blender, I can create a plane, I can export it, I can import it into Mundus. But I'm like, you know what, planes and cubes, just being able to add those very quickly within the editor would be nice. Especially even if you're just prototyping or you're creating, like, you want to create some walls or something like that. And so to do that now, you can right click, go add. You can see add a plane or add a cube. If I add a cube here, I'll drag it on over. And what it does is if your scene doesn't already have a cube or the plane in it, it's going to create a new asset in a new model asset down here, standard cube GLTF. So it'll create that for you, and then it'll reuse that asset from here on. So there's our cube. You know, we can scale it, do what we want with it. We can go to the material. We can change its color, whatever we want to do. So that's just another nice feature. Like I said, probably going to be really handy if you're just prototyping and you're trying to create some quick walls or something like that. Then this may come in handy. Okay, so this last one here was probably the biggest. It was definitely the biggest PR, the most amount of changes. And so you can see it's quite a bit of, we removed a lot of stuff, and then we changed a lot of stuff as well. 93 file change. What is this doing? It's moving the terrain shader, which was a separate custom shader, moved it over to use the PBR shader from GDX GLTF. I modified that the PBR shader a little bit to support the terrain splat mapping. And so that is the first change. So now we're using GLTF for rendering the PBR. We're using a PBR material in the GDX GLTF shader to render the terrain. So that's a bit of a nice little improvement there. When I did that, I went ahead and I had to rewrite a lot of the lighting code in Mundus because it was using its own like mixture of its own lighting system and then the PBR lighting system for models. And I want to get rid of that, and I want to make them as consistent as I can. So I removed a lot of the custom lighting code in Mundus to follow more along with libGDX conventions and GDX GLTF conventions. Along with that, also we added triplanar rendering or triplanar sampling for the terrains, and I'll show you that in a minute. If we just quickly go down here, we can see a difference. Also with this change, I overhauled how the terrain normals get calculated. The way they were calculated before wasn't great. It wasn't well, with the new change, what we do is like a normal averaging algorithm. Makes the normals look a little more realistic. And if we take a look, this is what the old terrain shader looked like with the old normals. There's like a very sharp drop between the light and the shaded part of the terrain. Now this terrain is being rendered with the new PBR shader and the new terrain normals, which you can see the terrain normals are a little more gradual. To me, it could be a personal choice, but I think this looks quite a bit better. Some material changes. What I've done in the UI, it's kind of the way the UI looks. When you want to modify a material, it used to be you modified it on the game object that has a model component, and that gives you the false impression that that material is assigned to that specific object or model, and it's not. So what I've done is I've actually made the material editing window. It's a totally separate window, and you would actually go to edit that window separately. One, this cleans things up quite a bit in the UI. If you want to edit the material, you just go straight to the material instead. And two, it doesn't kind of mislead you into thinking what material is assigned to that object specifically. Lastly, we got triplanar sampling for the textures. And so this sometimes there's good use cases for this. Sometimes it's good to have, sometimes it's not. It depends on your scene and your terrain. But I can show you right now, we've created a perfect example for when you might want to use triplanar mapping on the terrain. So we take a look. We created this ramp, and you can see that the UVs, right, the texture itself is being all stretched out, and it does not look very good. So this could be a good use case for triplanar. If we go to settings, I'll turn that on and watch what happens. So look at that. Tries to clean up those textures. And the triplanar mapping is basically, it's generating new UVs instead of using the UVs, aka the texture coordinates from the terrain mesh. So this is a good use case where the triplanar is much nicer. Again, we can just toggle and see the difference there. So that is another new feature. And that's it for the main changes. I'm sure I probably forgot some. I might have skipped over some. Another change that was kind of behind the scenes is I refactored a lot of how the rendering code works, because before the rendering code was very coupled. It was tightly coupled with the components in the game objects, and if you wanted to do anything like post-processing, or if you wanted to have more control over the rendering, it was really difficult because they're all tangled. So what I've done here is I've pulled all the rendering logic out. I've decoupled it from the components and everything. The components don't know anything about rendering now. All they have to do is say, hey, here's my mesh, give it back to the rendering code, and the rendering code takes care of it from there. So that was a nice under the hood change, which is going to free us up for new features down the road. And other than that, DGZT and had a lot of great PRs scattered through here, where just a lot of UI fixes, a lot of little bugs, a lot of bug fixes in the UI, like selections not clearing, things like that. So I'm definitely very appreciative for those PRs. And that's it for 050. We've already started working on some features for 060. Maybe I'll talk about them in another video. I usually don't like talking about new features until they're, until they're done, because I don't want to show off something that for one reason or another gets halted, or we can't finish it in time. So that's it. I'll leave you guys with that, and let me know what you think.